Would you dare to face danger to save two children who aren't even yours? On a silent night, in the heart of an isolated mansion, Brooke, an unlikely babysitter, discovers that true heroism is born out of desperation. But will she overcome her fear and protect Sophie and Savannah from a masked intruder, or will this be the last story they'll ever tell? Buckle up, because this is a journey of tension and resilience like no other. Brooke never planned to care for children. In fact, she hadn't planned much of anything lately. At 24, her life felt like a string of wrong choices and closed doors. After dropping out of college, she spent months searching for something to spark her interest. When the babysitting opportunity came along, she hesitated. An isolated mansion, 2 kids from a wealthy family, everything seemed so far from the world she knew. But with rent overdue, necessity often leaves little room for second-guessing. Upon meeting Sophie and Savannah, Brooke found something unexpected. The twins were adorable but lonely. With parents who were constantly away, they lived surrounded by expensive toys but lacked something simple and essential: genuine attention. Within days, Brooke began to notice their shy smiles, unexpected hugs, and the way their eyes lit up at her stories. A bond began to form, almost magically, and Brooke started to see this job as more than just an obligation. The Harrison mansion was a world of its own. Surrounded by dense forest, the house exuded cold, impersonal luxury. Brooke, accustomed to the noise of the city, felt like an intruder in its overwhelming silence. Yet there was something more about that house, something that seemed to lurk in the shadows. As the days passed, Brooke couldn't shake a faint sense of unease, as though unseen eyes were watching her. One night, while telling the twins a bedtime story, Brooke was struck by how much the children trusted her. Sophie clung tightly to her hand, and Savannah fell asleep in her lap. Brooke realized that these small lives now depended on her. It was a frightening yet empowering feeling. For the first time in a long while, she felt important, needed, as though she was finding her place in the world. The Harrisons weren't bad parents, but they were absent. Their constant commitments and travels kept them away, leaving the girls in the care of a strict, indifferent housekeeper. Brooke began to notice the void this created in the children's lives. She became more than a babysitter. She became a confidant, a friend, and often the only source of comfort for the twins. The responsibility weighed on her, but it also gave her life a new sense of purpose. Despite feeling out of place in such a luxurious environment, Brooke found small joys. She played with the twins in the garden, experimented with recipes in the enormous kitchen, and explored the mansion's endless corridors. It was a different routine, but she started to enjoy the idea of building something there, even if only temporarily. Still, deep down, something told her that this calm wouldn't last. The mansion's isolation brought an unsettling feeling. Brooke felt safe during the day, but when night fell, the silence became oppressive. She began questioning the stories she'd heard in town about the property, rumors of old disputes and unexpected visitors. She brushed off the thoughts, but the sense that something was about to happen lingered. Brooke started to pay closer attention to everything. Small details caught her eye. A window left open in the morning after she was certain she'd closed it the night before, distant noises seemingly coming from outside. She tried not to alarm the girls, but her discomfort grew. There was something about the house that didn't add up, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Even so, Brooke began to feel genuine affection for the children and the mansion. There was beauty in caring for Sophie and Savannah, in hearing their laughter, in knowing that, at least for now, she made a difference in their lives. This feeling gave Brooke an unexpected sense of determination. She decided that as long as she was there, she would do everything in her power to protect those girls, even though she had no idea what challenges fate had in store. Deep down, Brooke knew that something was about to change. There was a tension in the air she couldn't ignore. But the connection she had built with the twins was stronger than any unease. She was ready to face whatever came her way, even if she didn't know what it would be. Little did Brooke know that her courage would be tested in ways she could never have imagined. The third night began like any other. The twins were unusually restless, and Brooke had to invent a story full of princesses and dragons to calm them down. The mansion seemed quieter than usual, the kind of silence that plays tricks on your mind. After finally tucking Sophie and Savannah into bed, she allowed herself to relax on the couch with a warm cup of tea. But then, a sound shattered the calm. Footsteps. Downstairs. Brooke froze. Maybe it was the housekeeper, she thought. But something didn't feel right. The footsteps were hesitant, almost stealthy. For a moment, she considered ignoring it. She could lock herself and the girls in their room and wait for the noise to pass. But a growing unease wouldn't let her rest. What if it was something serious? What if someone was breaking into the house? Fear began to creep in, but she knew she had to act. As she descended the stairs, Brooke's heart pounded so loudly it seemed to echo in the silence. Each step creaked beneath her feet, amplifying her tension. The idea of someone being inside the mansion felt absurd. Who would invade such an isolated place? Yet, the unease was real, and she felt as though every step was bringing her closer to something she'd rather not confront. Deep down, Brooke wanted to retreat. She could go back to the bedroom, hide with the twins, and wait for morning. But then she thought of Sophie and Savannah. The girls trusted her, depended on her. The thought of anything, or anyone, threatening them was unbearable. Taking a deep breath, she recalled her grandmother's words. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting in spite of it. Those words pushed her forward, even though her hands trembled. As Brooke reached the living room, her breath caught in her throat. The housekeeper was lying on the floor, motionless. Shock washed over her, freezing her in place for what felt like an eternity. Fear and panic churned inside her as she tried to process what she was seeing. The housekeeper didn't appear gravely injured, but she was unconscious. And then Brooke heard it, a faint sound of drawers being rummaged through in the nearby study. Fear transformed into a kind of controlled panic. Brooke knew she needed to get back to the bedroom to protect the children, but what then? She had no plan. Climbing the stairs quickly but quietly, she struggled to keep her composure. Her mind raced through possibilities, weighing every noise against the rising tension. The sound of footsteps below seemed to draw closer, each one heightening her dread. Back in the bedroom, Brooke locked the door and knelt beside the twins, who were still sound asleep. She hesitated, afraid to wake them, but the urgency outweighed her fears. Gently, she roused Sophie and Savannah, whispering that they needed to hide. Still groggy, the girls trusted her without question. Brooke guided them out of bed, doing her best to suppress the growing dread in her chest. Leading the twins down the hallway toward the hiding spot she'd noticed in the basement, Brooke's fear was palpable. The sensation of being followed clung to her like a shadow. Every faint noise felt amplified, as though the intruder could sense their movements. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, almost unbearable. The twins clung tightly to her hands, seeking the security she could barely muster for herself. When they reached the basement, Brooke located the trapdoor she'd seen earlier. With some effort, she pried it open and helped the girls down. The hiding spot was cramped and pitch black, but it was the safest place she could think of. As she lowered the trapdoor behind her, the sound of footsteps descending the basement stairs made her blood run cold. The intruder was closer than ever, and Brooke knew she couldn't afford to falter. Inside the hiding spot, the air was thick, and the silence was suffocating. The twins clung to each other while Brooke strained to hear any movements outside. Fear gnawed at her, but something inside refused to let her give up. She knew this was only the beginning. Brooke could feel it. An even greater test was still to come. As the oppressive quiet surrounded them, memories of her grandmother surfaced. Her grandmother had always been the one to teach her about bravery, even in the toughest situations. Brooke recalled a specific afternoon when, as a child, she had fallen off her bike and refused to get back on. Her grandmother, firm yet loving, had said, "You can be afraid, but you can't let it stop you." Those words echoed in her mind now, as if her grandmother were there, guiding her. Sitting on the cold floor with Sophie and Savannah trembling beside her, Brooke felt a surge of determination. She wasn't naturally strong or brave, but her grandmother had always said courage was built one step at a time, with every choice we make. And in that moment, Brooke's choice was clear: she would protect those children at any cost. Even with fear clawing at her, she couldn't allow herself to fail. Brooke began to plan. Her eyes scanned the small space for anything useful. The hiding spot was makeshift, almost claustrophobic, but it offered temporary protection. The question was, for how long? Outside, the intruder's footsteps seemed to wander through the basement. Each sound sent a fresh wave of tension through her, but Brooke focused on one thought. What would her grandmother do? The answer was always the same: act. The girls were frightened but trusted her unconditionally. Savannah, clutching Brooke's arm, whispered, "You're going to keep us safe, right?" That simple, desperate question tightened Brooke's chest. "Yes, I'll keep you safe," she replied without hesitation. In that moment, Brooke realized her courage came from them. It was the fear in the twins' eyes that gave her the strength to move forward. When the intruder seemed to move farther away, Brooke seized the brief reprieve to search the space around her. There were some old boxes and a piece of wood that could serve as an improvised weapon. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. She took a deep breath, tension coursing through her, and prepared for what might come next. She didn't know exactly what she would do, but she knew she couldn't just sit and wait. Upstairs, the sound of a drawer being opened caught her attention. The intruder was searching for something specific. This wasn't a random break-in, there was a purpose behind it. Brooke's mind raced to connect the dots. The unconscious housekeeper, the rummaged drawers, it felt personal. She knew the intruder could return to the basement at any moment and that time was running out. But what could she do without putting the children in even greater danger? Brooke began to calmly instruct the twins, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. She explained that if anything happened, they were to stay hidden and make no sound. Sophie, ever the curious one, asked why. Brooke simply said, "Because I'll handle it." There was a firmness in her voice that surprised even herself. Maybe this was what her grandmother had meant about building courage. It appears when you need it most. The sound of footsteps returned, louder and closer this time. The intruder was descending the stairs again, and Brooke felt adrenaline surge through her veins. She gripped the piece of wood tightly, ignoring the tremor in her hands. There was no more time for doubt. She knew she had to find a way to distract him, to ensure he wouldn't discover the twins. The fear was real, but her determination to protect them was greater. As the footsteps grew louder, Brooke closed her eyes for a moment and thought of her grandmother again. "You're stronger than you think," she used to say. Brooke exhaled slowly and prepared to leave the hiding spot. She didn't know exactly what she would do, but she knew every second mattered. Deep down, she felt this was the first of many decisions that would test her courage. The basement door creaked as the intruder stepped in, searching the space. Brooke knew this was the defining moment. She glanced at the twins one last time, trying to project calm, and began formulating a plan to distract him. It was now or never, and Brooke felt her ultimate test was about to begin. Her pulse pounded in her temples as the intruder moved deeper into the basement. Every step he took seemed to echo in her mind, amplifying the tension. The wooden plank in her hands felt impossibly heavy, and the darkness of the hiding spot pressed in on her. Still, something inside her screamed that she had to act. With one final glance at the girls, she silently cracked the trapdoor open, leaving it ajar to avoid drawing attention. If there was any chance to lead him away, she would take it. Meanwhile, the intruder rifled through the boxes impatiently. Brooke noticed his movements were tense, almost jittery, as though he was afraid of being discovered. That didn't make him any less dangerous, but it might be his weakness. Moving with deliberate stealth, she slipped out of the hiding spot, each step a test of her resolve. The lives of the girls depended on her, and hesitation wasn't an option. Suddenly, a muffled sound came from the hiding spot. Savannah, trying to stifle a sob, let out a faint noise. The intruder froze instantly, turning toward the trapdoor. Brooke's heart stopped for a moment. Without thinking, she banged the wooden plank against the wall, creating a loud crash that echoed through the basement. The intruder spun toward the noise, and Brooke darted in the opposite direction, praying he would follow the sound. The plan worked. The masked man moved quickly toward the noise, searching the area in haste. Brooke seized the moment to crouch behind a stack of boxes, her breath rapid but controlled. She considered striking him with the plank but spotted the weapon at his waist and knew the risk was too great. As the intruder wandered away from the hiding spot, Brooke began to strategize. There was a staircase leading upstairs, but she would need to distract him again to use it. Her eyes scanned the area, searching for anything useful. On a dusty shelf, she spotted an old oil lamp, heavy enough to make an impact. She grabbed it, preparing for her next move. The intruder turned his attention back to the trapdoor, muttering something inaudible. He seemed frustrated, which only heightened Brooke's anxiety. Before he could get too close, she hurled the lamp toward the opposite corner of the room. It crashed with a resounding clatter, drawing his attention away. As he moved toward the noise, Brooke sprinted silently to the stairs. Reaching the top, she closed the basement door behind her, locking it with a key she found hanging nearby. Her body trembled, but she couldn't stop now. She rushed back to the hiding spot, relieved to find Sophie and Savannah still safe. The girls clung to her, and Brooke whispered words of comfort, masking the fear still coursing through her. The basement door wouldn't hold for long, Brooke knew that. The intruder had already begun pounding on it, the wood groaning under the force. She needed a solution fast. Pulling out her phone, she tried calling the police again, but the signal was weak. Still, she managed to send a quick emergency message with the house's location before losing connection. It was a small victory, but there was still so much left to face. With time running out, Brooke began mapping out an escape. The upstairs windows seemed like an option, but going higher meant exposing the children even more. Below, the intruder's muffled threats grew louder, and the splintering would made it clear the door wouldn't last. Brooke looked at the twins, willing herself to appear calm. She was venturing into uncharted territory, but there was no choice. As the basement door finally gave way with a loud crack, Brooke made her decision. It was time to improvise. Gripping the girls' hands tightly, she led them down the hallway, each step deliberate and silent. The tension was suffocating, the air thick with dread. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a betrayal, as though the intruder could appear at any moment. Reaching the living room, Brooke remembered a window that led to the garden. It was high but accessible with a chair. She quickly explained the plan to the twins, keeping her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her. The girls nodded, their trust in her unwavering. Brooke pushed down the rising despair and focused on the task at hand. As she struggled to open the window, she heard footsteps ascending from the basement. The intruder had broken through and was now coming upstairs. Brooke swallowed her fear and worked faster. The window was stuck, and her trembling hands made it harder to force it open. Sophie, sensing the urgency, whispered, "We're going to be okay, right, Brooke?" The girl's quiet faith renewed Brooke's resolve. Failure wasn't an option. Finally, the window gave way, but the noise drew the intruder's attention. Brooke heard the metallic clatter of something dropping, followed by hurried footsteps heading toward the living room. Without hesitation, she lifted Sophie through the window, helping her to the ground outside. Savannah followed quickly. The girls looked at her, their eyes wide with fear and hope, as Brooke prepared to climb out. Before she could, the intruder appeared in the doorway. His mask covered half of his face, and he held a gun that seemed too heavy for his unsteady hands. For a moment, Brooke froze, the weight of desperation threatening to paralyze her. But then she remembered her grandmother's words, "Fear only wins if you let it." Her gaze shifted to the twins outside, their wide eyes locked on her. They were her strength. The man began to approach, muttering something inaudible. Brooke seized the moment, grabbing a chair and hurling it in his direction. The throw wasn't perfect, but it was enough to make him stumble backward. Without waiting, Brooke leaped through the window, landing awkwardly beside the twins. Pain shot through her leg from the fall, but she ignored it. Taking the girls' hands, she ran toward the garden, her mind singularly focused on keeping them safe. The garden felt endless. The tall grass and uneven terrain made every step a challenge, but Brooke didn't stop. Behind her, she could hear the intruder climbing through the window, his heavy steps closing the distance. She racked her brain, trying to remember the layout of the property. Then it struck her, a small tool shed near the greenhouse. It wasn't much, but it might buy them a few precious minutes until the police arrived. It was a gamble, but it was all she had. Reaching the tool shed, Brooke threw the door open and hurried the girls inside. The space was cramped, filled with rusted tools and dusty boxes. She locked the door from the inside and frantically searched for something she could use as a weapon. Her hands landed on a wrench and a metal rod. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Her heart pounded in her chest as the sound of the intruder's footsteps grew louder outside. The man began circling the shed, banging on the door and jiggling the handle. Brooke kept the twins silent, hugging them tightly as she tried to steady her breathing. The tension was almost unbearable, but she refused to give in to despair. There was something greater at stake, the safety of the girls. As terrifying as it was, she was willing to face anything to protect them. While the intruder continued his attempts to break in, Brooke heard a distant sound, the faint wail of sirens. It was barely audible, but it reignited a flicker of hope. The police were coming. Still, it wasn't over. The man seemed to realize his time was running out and began slamming against the door with renewed force. Brooke gripped the metal rod tightly, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her. The moment of reckoning was near. The pounding grew more insistent, each thud echoing through the tiny shed. Brooke could feel sweat trickling down her neck as she braced herself. The twins huddled behind a stack of old boxes, their eyes wide with terror. The intruder wouldn't give up easily, and Brooke knew this was it. There was nowhere left to run. It was her against him now. The door gave way with a loud crack, swinging open as the man stormed in, a gun in his hand. Brooke instinctively placed herself between him and the girls, her body trembling but her resolve unshakable. The intruder's eyes locked on hers, his voice sharp as he demanded, "Where is it?" Brooke didn't respond. She needed to stall him, to buy any precious seconds until the sirens came closer. Fear threatened to paralyze her, but the thought of the girls gave her the strength to stand her ground. In a sudden move, Brooke swung the metal rod at the intruder's hand, knocking the gun to the ground. The impact startled both of them, but she didn't hesitate. She lunged for the weapon as the man stumbled back, clutching his wrist in pain. Her fingers closed around the cold metal, and for a moment she froze. She had no idea how to use a gun, but in that instant, it felt like her only chance. The intruder recovered quickly, charging toward her. In a split-second decision, Brooke hurled the gun across the shed, sending it skidding out of reach. It was a risky move, but it worked. The man turned his attention to retrieving it. Seizing the opportunity, Brooke shoved a tall shelving unit with all her strength. The structure tipped over, crashing onto the intruder and pinning him beneath its weight. The twins watched in silence, their small bodies trembling as they tried to stifle their sobs. Brooke rushed to them, grabbing their hands. "We have to go now," she whispered, leading them out of the shed. Outside, the sirens were louder, but the danger wasn't over. Glancing back, she saw the man struggling to free himself from the debris. They didn't have much time. Running toward the mansion, Brooke felt the adrenaline driving her forward. The intruder had managed to free himself and was chasing after them. Panic clawed at her, but she refused to stop. "Trust me," she urged the girls, who were struggling to keep up. Once inside, Brooke led them up the stairs, heading for the attic, the highest point in the house. She hoped the elevation would give them an advantage. In the attic, Brooke found a small skylight that led to the roof. It was a risky escape, but it was their only option. She helped Sophie and Savannah climb through, one at a time, while the sound of footsteps echoed closer. The intruder was coming, and Brooke knew she had to move fast. Climbing through the skylight herself, she guided the girls across the slanted roof, the strong wind making every step precarious. The man appeared in the attic just as Brooke reached the other side of the roof. He shouted something incomprehensible, but she didn't look back. Her focus was on the horizon, where the flashing blue lights of police cars finally appeared. Relief washed over her, but it was fleeting. The man began climbing onto the roof, determined to reach them. Brooke felt her strength waning, but she couldn't let fear win. In one swift motion, she grabbed a loose roof tile and hurled it at the intruder. It wasn't a perfect hit, but it was enough to throw him off balance. He slipped, tumbling back into the attic with a frustrated cry. Brooke didn't wait to see what happened next. Gripping the girls' hands tightly, she helped them climb down to a safe spot on the ground. When they finally reached solid ground, the police were already entering the mansion. The twins clung to Brooke, sobbing as she collapsed to her knees, the adrenaline draining from her body. She held them close, whispering, "You're safe now." The intruder was apprehended without further incident, and Brooke finally allowed herself to breathe. Even as relief set in, she knew the events of that night would stay with her forever. As the police asked questions and the Harrisons rushed in to check on their daughters, Brooke remained silent. Something about the moment felt transformative. She was no longer the same person who had entered that house days ago. The courage she had uncovered within herself was greater than any fear. The worst was over, but Brooke knew her journey was far from complete. Brooke sat on the sofa in the Harrison mansion's grand living room, the twins clinging to her as if they'd never let go. The chaos of the night still lingered in the air, but a sense of safety was beginning to take hold. Sophie and Savannah's parents burst into the room, frantic, wrapping their arms around their daughters while casting incredulous glances at Brooke. The police chief began explaining the situation, only to be interrupted by Savannah, who firmly declared, "She saved us." The Harrisons needed a moment to process what they were hearing. Brooke, her face still marked by tension and her clothes smudged with dust and tears, didn't look like a typical hero. Yet the gratitude in their eyes said it all. Mr. Harrison was the first to speak. "You risked your life for my daughters. I don't even know how to thank you." Brooke felt a lump rise in her throat. She didn't want to be seen as a hero, she had simply done what felt right. As the police interrogated the intruder downstairs, Brooke stayed with the girls on her lap, as if her presence was the only thing keeping their fear at bay. Sophie, usually the quieter of the two, whispered, "You're the bravest person I know." The simple, heartfelt words brought tears to Brooke's eyes. She had never thought of herself that way, but perhaps it was true. The housekeeper, who had been treated by paramedics, also made a point to thank her. "I didn't think I'd wake up. When I saw the intruder, I feared the worst. What you did was incredible." Brooke, still processing the night, nodded shyly. Every moment of the ordeal was etched in her memory, yet it felt surreal, as if it had all been a distant nightmare. The Harrisons asked Brooke to stay at the mansion while the investigation continued. She hesitated, but the thought of leaving Sophie and Savannah after everything they'd been through felt impossible. The twins wouldn't let her go either. Every time she took a step toward the door, they clung to her hand. Brooke felt a new sensation growing in her chest, a sense of belonging she had never known before. As the days passed and the chaos began to subside, the Harrison family came to see just how special Brooke was. They arranged a rare formal dinner to express their gratitude. "You're not just our daughter's babysitter," Mrs. Harrison said. "You're part of our family now." The sincerity in her voice made Brooke realize that her life was changing in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her bond with Sophie and Savannah grew even deeper. The twins didn't just trust her, they idolized her. "You're like a real superhero," Sophie said one afternoon as she drew a picture of Brooke wearing a red cape. Brooke smiled, still coming to terms with the impact she had on their lives. The girls had taught her something she never expected, that love and courage could transform everything. The Harrisons surprised Brooke with a proposition, a permanent role in their lives, not just as a babysitter, but as a mentor for their daughters. "We want you to stay," Mr. Harrison insisted. "We can't replace what you've lost, but we'd like to help you build something new." Brooke sat in silence for a moment, feeling the weight of the offer. It was a chance for a new beginning, and she knew that accepting it meant embracing a whole new life. That night, as the twins slept soundly, Brooke sat alone on the mansion's veranda, gazing up at the starry sky. Relief mingled with a quiet restlessness. What would the future hold for her? For the first time, she wasn't afraid. A calm courage had taken root within her, a certainty that whatever lay ahead, she would face it. Her journey was far from over, but now, she had something she'd never had before, a home. In the days that followed, a strange calm settled over the mansion. The house, which had been the scene of terror that night, began to feel like a refuge. Brooke, however, could still feel the adrenaline lingering in her veins. The echoes of that night weren't completely gone. The twins, on the other hand, seemed to grow more secure each day, finding comfort in Brooke's constant care and warmth. The intruder was apprehended, and the police revealed that he was a former business partner of Mr. Harrison. financial troubles and unresolved resentment had driven him to plan the attack. For Brooke, learning the details brought both relief and unease. The immediate danger was gone, but the realization that such terror could stem from human grudges was unsettling. Everything felt so fragile. As time passed, Brooke began piecing her life back together. She still felt like the lost young woman who had arrived at the mansion without direction, but something had shifted. There was a weight to her thoughts now, a depth born from what she had endured. Her priority remained the twins, and her bond with them grew stronger each day. Sophie and Savannah were her anchor, a reminder that even in chaos, love and renewal could be found. The Harrisons made good on their promise to include Brooke as part of the family. She now had a permanent room in the mansion, decorated by the twins with their drawings and flowers from the garden. "This is your home now," they told her in a conversation that brought her to tears. Yet, Brooke couldn't shake a lingering hesitation. It was hard to believe she finally had a place where she truly belonged. Part of her still questioned if she deserved it. As she rebuilt her routine, Brooke realized she also needed to care for herself. The trauma of that night lingered, especially during quiet moments. One night, hearing a strange noise in the hallway, she instinctively got up, feeling as if she were back in that terrifying moment. But instead of succumbing to fear, she reminded herself of what she had faced and how she had overcome it. That thought brought an unexpected sense of peace. Brooke also began reflecting on her own dreams, the ones she had abandoned before coming to the mansion. Why had she left college? Why had she convinced herself she wasn't capable of moving forward? These questions surfaced as she watched the twins play in the garden, and she realized something important. Maybe this job, this connection, wasn't just temporary. It might be the beginning of something much bigger. The Harrison family, recognizing Brooke's unique qualities, encouraged her to consider pursuing education or child psychology. "You have a gift," they said, urging her to think about her future. Brooke smiled, still uncertain but deeply moved by their faith in her. Perhaps it was time to start believing in herself again, to use the strength she discovered that night to build a new path. Over time, the mansion transformed. The Harrisons became more present in their daughters' lives, and Sophie and Savannah flourished under their parents' attention and Brooke's guidance. The once cold and distant home grew warm, filled with laughter and meaningful moments. Brooke realized her presence had played a part in this transformation, and for the first time, she felt a sense of pride she had never known. One sunny afternoon, as she watched Sophie and Savannah run through the garden, Brooke felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. She still had doubts and carried scars from that night, but now she saw them as part of her story. They didn't weaken her, they reminded her of her strength. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation, had become a place where she truly found herself. The future remained uncertain, but Brooke knew she was ready to face it. She had discovered not only a purpose but a new version of herself. As the sun set on the horizon, she smiled at the girls and allowed herself to believe that, finally, she was on the right path.